Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar. This is Heather Creven from the Nebraska Recycling Council, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Nebraska Recycling Council is a statewide, member-based, charitable nonprofit supporting collaboration between communities, businesses, solid waste, and recycling industries to improve recycling collection and infrastructure. Our mission is to maximize the economic and environmental benefits of resource recovery in Nebraska. In this webinar, you will learn about Eagle Sign and Printing and their sustainable business practices, environmentally friendly products, efforts towards zero waste, and how they are committed to reducing their environmental impact. Today's presenter is Matt Ashmore, owner of Eagle Printing and Sign. He earned a BS in Resource Conservation from the University of Montana and a JD from the University of Nebraska College of Law. While having experience teaching science to secondary and post-secondary students, Matt has spent much of his professional life around the printing industry. He is now the second-generation owner of Eagle Printing and Sign and has had a lifelong interest in environmental issues and sustainable living. During the webinar, please type your questions into the chat box as they come to mind, and they will be answered at the end of the presentation. A recording of this presentation will be available following the webinar on our website, www.nrcne.org, under the Resources tab on the Webinars page. Thank you again for attending this webinar, and as I turn the presentation over to Matt, there will be a slight delay before he begins.
Hello, I think that we're ready to go here, and thank you, Heather, for that introduction. I appreciate that. So I am going to talk about Eagle Printing and Sign, give a little lowdown on our history, and then talk about what we do here and how we try to practice as green as we possibly can, and how we work with our customers to do that too, and talk about a couple areas where we could improve, and then hopefully answer a couple of questions. Eagle Printing is a 15-person, small to medium-sized commercial print shop. We focus mostly on digital and offset printing, and then wide format printing, which leads us into the signage. We have been in Lincoln for 26 years now. As Heather said, I am the second-generation owner, and we do mostly business-to-business printing, but we also have quite a bit of walk-in and people that come in off the street and use some of our services up front and deal with us that way. We do mostly digital printing, and I'll get into a little bit of that once we talk about some of the things that we do here, but we have a long history of working with a lot of people here in Lincoln and the region. So let me dive into our main efforts here as far as how we try to do things with sustainability in mind. The big thing is we recycle 99% of the stuff that we use in here, and most of that is paper, and we recycle the vast majority of it. There was a time here, and I remember personally being involved in doing this, but there was a time here where we would fill up an entire dumpster weekly with paper. And most of that paper is the scraps that are left over from cutting down a lot of the print jobs that we do. A lot of the printing is getting a little technical, but cut to bleed, for example. So we have to cut off all four sides of a flyer where the ink bleeds off the edge. And so we amass a large amount of cut scraps, and those cut scraps are collected, and then we have to get rid of them. So we used to throw all that material away. We no longer do, and the Nebraska Recycling Council was helpful in getting us to this point and helping us understand how to do this, but we now recycle all that material. So we have 10 large recycling containers, bins, that we now have placed around the shop. Quite a few of them placed near the cutter where we cut down all that paper, and it gets placed into those bins. Yep. Yep.
I'm going to interrupt you here. I don't see the slideshow advancing.
You don't see what?
The slideshow advancing.
Oh, yep. That's my fault. Sorry. Thank you. So as you can see here, there's our cutter to the left and then the recycling bins to the right. So now all this material goes into these bins, and then weekly it's picked up and recycled. So now that dumpster that we used to fill up every week often only has a couple bags in it, and most of that is now most of it's just kitchen waste and other consumables here that we throw away. And I'll talk about this in a little bit. There is some wide format waste too that we can't recycle, like the vinyl and stuff that we use on walls and such. So this was a huge change, and we take a lot of pride in the fact that, now the vast majority of our paper gets placed in these bins and gets recycled. We also do a lot of our wide format stuff is like foam core signs and coroplast signs like yard signs and all those things. And a lot of that material is recyclable. A lot of it's PVC based, which, while it is a petroleum product, it is still recyclable. And there's really only one board foam core that we use a fair amount of that isn't recyclable. So that's a material that we do have to still put in the dumpster. We also take great effort in recycling as much of the other stuff that we can. Our printing press, we have 2 offset presses, and one of them uses aluminum plates. And so you can see in the left there in the bin, we collect those over time and then actually sell that material to a metal company, to a recycling company. And then same with the aluminum composite panels to the right. We use a lot of that for signage, for outdoor signage and other things. And we keep all those scraps, and they come and pick up all those materials as well. And then some other things that we do within the shop, or that we have done. A lot of the equipment we use is very doesn't produce a lot of waste, basically. And so our printing presses, we use our processes to create our plates and to burn our images to our plates are all chemical free. And so we have no true chemical waste from our offset printing or our digital printing. The only waste that we do generate from our offset presses is a little bit of solvent-based ink waste. And we do have to clean the ink off of our rollers. And when we put the solvent on our ink rollers, there's a contraption within the press that kind of scrapes off, basically, for lack of better words, the ink and the solvent and places it into a tray. And weekly, our press operator empties that into that black container right there. And, we are proud to say that we don't have to take that to get incinerated. I mean, it's usually once a year that we take it to the county and they take care of it. And that is the only chemical-based waste product that we actually have to dispose. And it's very, very, very little of it. On the digital side, I'm going to go back here. Our digital presses are very, very green. They've come a long way with it. There is nothing that gets thrown away from the digital presses. So all the parts that they replace over time on them, they take back with them and repurpose and reuse. And then the toner cartridges that we use are all recycled and reused. So they send us these boxes. We are able to place our toner cartridges into those boxes and send them back. And they will also accept any of our desktop printers and their toner cartridges. So all our little desktop printers that we have throughout the shop for folks up front, we can place all those in there and they'll take them too. So that helps us even reduce waste even more. And so the digital presses are really useful in keeping down waste. So again, for all of the production of all of our presses for the digital offset, only thing we throw away from them is a little bit in that container there once a year. Also, as far as other things that we've done in the shop, we've tried to incorporate recycled materials and reused materials into our building. So we did a redo on our front office and counters, and that's a 90% recycled countertop. It's pretty cool stuff. And we also did a complete conversion of all of our fluorescent lights to LED. So in the last few years, we have had some growth and have added some more equipment. But because we did this transition to all this LEDs, my electric bill and power usage actually hasn't gone up, and so we're pretty proud of that too. LES here, the local electric company, actually has some rebates, so they were helpful in helping us pay for the lights, pay for the conversions. And so that's something else that is a pretty big deal, and it's so nice because the fluorescents burn out and take so much maintenance, and there's so much waste, the big bulbs, and so all that's gone. Another thing that we did or have done in the last couple of years to help reduce our waste and our impact is when I took ownership of Eagle, we had 2 vehicles that were used for the shop for deliveries and outside sales. And they were both 8-cylinder vehicles, and now we have a 4-cylinder delivery van and a 4-cylinder hybrid car to use for sales and other things. So, and it is a hybrid. It's not a plug-in hybrid, but it is a hybrid. So we've been able to reduce our petroleum usage and carbon production that way as well. I think that pretty much covers most of the things that we do in the shop as far as how we try to reduce our waste and with what we do as far as production. As far as the printing goes, the digital printers here are, like I talked about before, are really good with no waste, but they also are pretty good as far as the ingredients that they use. Some of the ingredients are even organic, which I assume is not so much that they chase down the organic label, but it is just what the ingredients are as far as the toner is used. And they are, as far as green, as far as emissions and other things like that, they have very little and they're really good. With our wide format equipment, we've gone with equipment that is really green. Our wide format printers both use standard 110 power. Our UV printer, you can see the ink bag here. The ink actually comes in these bags, and those are recyclable and really low waste. And you can see the light over there, those blue lights, that's actually the UV light printing. That light is curing that ink. So what that means is there's no off-gassing, there's no VOCs. So it's considered about as green as you can print as far as wide format printing or digital printing. It's 110 power. Everything that goes into it is recyclable, and then the process itself is good. There's no air quality issues. It's good for the employees. It's good for our internal environment, and we feel really good about that. We do have another wide format printer that isn't quite as green, but it's still about as green as you can go. It's an eco-solvent machine, eco-solvent, and there's very, very, very little off-gassing. You can actually stand next to it and not even smell any ink drying, which is nice. Another way that we work to help with reducing the impact of all the paper, printing is seen as kind of an industry where we don't have the greatest reputation as being the greenest industry, but there is more and more of a focus on using post-consumer waste materials in the paper. And so that's one area that we have made a concerted effort to try to use as much paper that has post-consumer waste materials in it as possible. So a lot of papers that are used in printing are coated papers, which means they have a little thin layer of clay actually on them. And, you know, it's what you see all your marketing brochures and pieces. You want that nice gloss look. And those papers traditionally have not included any recycled materials, but they are starting to change that. And more of the papers that are being offered have at least 10% post-consumer waste material, which is good. Not great, but it's good. And so we use those papers as just kind of like our house stock. So if somebody calls and wants a brochure on gloss paper, we use 10% post-consumer waste paper. And not even tell them. We do try to have conversations with people that we are using these papers, and we try to encourage them to use them more, but it is our house stock. We've also discovered a paper, and something I can talk about a little bit about making, trying to be even better about this stuff a little later, but talk about it now. There are some papers that are coming out, papers we've been testing that are coated papers that are 30% post-consumer waste. And so I'm kind of hoping that becomes the norm, because that would make everything a lot easier. Otherwise, there are some standard papers that we use. Some of the kind of nicer, stationary letterhead papers and other things do come with 25 and 30 and more percent post-consumer waste. And then we also have a line where we can do 50 and 100% post-consumer waste. So we have, folks that really want to make sure they're using the best paper possible. And so we're able to offer those papers to them, and we do suggest it as much as possible. The post-consumer waste papers, especially the 100-pound, do tend to look a little more gray. They're not quite as bright white, which typically the people that want to use those papers, that's what they're after. That's what they want. So there is that issue, and for some people that means they don't want to use them. The 30% and the 50% post-consumer waste papers are getting pretty good. They're pretty white, and so that's going to be an easier sell. As far as cost goes, it used to be that recycled papers were quite a bit more, and that's still the case, but they've gotten better. It's not quite as bad as it used to be. And sometimes the cost difference is really minimal, and it's pretty easy to convince a person that they should make that leap and use that paper that has more post-consumer waste. And there's other times that we just don't even worry about it. The cost difference is so small that we just incorporate the recycled paper into the project. So that's a trend that hopefully continues, that we get more and more papers that are available that have post-consumer waste. Typically the paper companies have been, cutting back on options for paper and some of the different papers and fancier paper. But right now we are seeing at least, more options for post-consumer waste. And I think that trend's going to continue, and hopefully the demand from the consumer continues to increase as well. Areas for improvement. We do a pretty good job of labeling our bins and where trash goes and where recycling materials go in our shop, but we could definitely do a little better. We have a little bit of a mixture of colors. Some are blue, and then we still have some that are black, and that's one area where we could probably be a little more clear to our staff here about where things go. We have also yet to kind of develop a true green team. We're pretty good about communicating with each other, but we could also put together a little program that would talk about what's recyclable and what's not. It gets a little confusing with some of our wide format signage products. We do a lot of cut vinyl, and vinyl, of course, is not recyclable. So that's something else that we have to trash. And there are some materials that go along with the cut vinyl, the backing paper and the transfer tape and some of those other things, where it's not always clear, where that materials go. And we're in a pretty good spot now where people understand and get the materials to the right spot. I do walk around and look in our recycling bins and our trash bins, and every once in a while I'll see a little paper in a trash bin, but it's not very often that happens, which always makes you feel good. Another area where we've talked about of trying to reduce some waste, because a lot of pretty much a majority of what we do throw away is kitchen trash, is possibly trying to do some composting or looking at other ways we can reduce that. I do encourage, we have a pretty good culture here of people, of staff bringing their own, water bottles and stuff like that. We're fortunate we don't really have a lot of water bottle trash or some of that other kitchen trash where you can be a little frustrated because we're using stuff we don't need to use. But composting, of course, is a little tricky because it involves, involves food, and we don't have a ton of food waste. I don't know, maybe we'll do a worm farm or something. I haven't quite figured that one out yet. Otherwise, the big focus for us is really that paper with post-consumer waste and encouraging, people every step along the way to try to use that paper. And I guess, basically kind of educating them. The cost factor isn't always that bad, and the paper is getting better, and I think we'll see more and more people using paper that has more post-consumer waste materials in it. Okay, I'm looking over my list here. I think I've covered about everything that I can cover that we do here at Eagle Printing. Is there any questions?
Yeah, Matt, our first question is, on the post-consumer waste, what is the price difference between doing 10%, 30%, 50, or 100 on paper?
And I missed the middle part, Heather. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, my phone was trying to ring. On the post-consumer waste paper, what is the price difference between a 10 or 100% or 30 or 50? How much more expensive or less expensive is it?
Right, and that's a little hard for me to say exactly, of course, because it kind of depends on the project and stuff. But it's usually no more than 10 to 15% higher. If you're doing a really big run, the difference between no post-consumer waste and 100% post-consumer waste can be as much as maybe 20%. And then again, of course, it depends on the scope of the project that you're doing and how much you're actually printing, and then does that amount add up? I don't have monster presses here. We're kind of more of your local small print and sign shop, and most of the runs that I do here are pretty small. And so for most of our projects, I mean, you might be talking about a difference of, $10 or $15, or maybe, 50 and 100. It's usually pretty small. And often the bigger issue is people get used to a paper, spec a paper, want a paper, expect that whiteness and those things, and that's where the barrier can be to get them to consider a paper that has more post-consumer waste. But the cost always is still an issue. People are budget driven, as they should be, and so any little place you can cut out, that's often something that they will do. So there lies the challenge.
And my next question, you kind of touched on a little bit, talking about the printing industry kind of having more of a negative impact than it did, say, 10 years ago. But how has it changed? Do you see a decrease in the amount of stuff being printed?
Yeah, the printing industry really has gone, pretty green. I think maybe we need to do a better job of advertising it. So yeah, there's a couple things. One is the technology involved, and then the other is the shift in what people are having printed. So involving the technology, in the last 10 years, there's been a real big change in how things are being printed. And in fact, at the last two, and I might even be a year behind, at the last 2 or 3 major, print trade shows where all the big companies go to sell their products, there has been, there are no more true offset presses. So, ink out of a can, Gutenberg style, presses are no longer even at the shows, the trade shows. There are still some being produced, but most of it now is just parts to keep the ones that are out there maintained. And that's a good thing for the environment, because the newer presses are all inkjet. And so they're all more like the digital presses that I have a picture of there on the right, and more like our wide format printer where everything is reusable. There's no chemicals, and it's, you know, it really changes the way the industry, you know, behaves, and it's a really good thing. Of course, that technology is going to take a while to get down to the smaller print shops, but it will eventually, and eventually there'll be a day when there'll be no longer ink out of the can. Everything will just be a high-end inkjet press. And then the rise of the digital press. You know, I talked about how green, you know, these guys are to the right. More and more people are using those. In fact, more and more print shops, especially print shops my size, are no longer even having offset presses. They're getting rid of them totally. And so that's a real shift away from the printing presses, the traditional printing presses, which can be more, you know, more dirty, for lack of better words. The digital presses are much more clean. And the fact that they work with us to help us send back materials and reuse materials and reuse all the parts, that makes a real big difference. So that's something that's a real positive as far as where the industry is going, and makes all of us in the industry feel good about it. And then the second part is just, yeah, what people are doing. You know, the digital age, the printing industry got, you know, there's a lot of people talking about how the printing industry would, you know, essentially disappear, or would be, you know, diminished to where there was very little of it being done, because everyone was going to send their newsletters by email, and, you know, everyone would just use websites, and there'd be email marketing, and everyone would use their desktop printers. You know, that was a fear that we had, that, you know, everyone would start buying all these, you know, decent desktop printers, and they would just print all their stuff themselves. And that definitely happened to a point, and the industry definitely took a hit. And of course, the Great Recession didn't help either. But we've really seen a return of the industry. There's been growth, and people are starting to print more. They're not printing the same as they used to. It's definitely more smaller run, you know, more high-end marketing pieces. You don't see as much as just the kind of big mailings. I mean, we all still get junk mail in our mailbox, of course, but it's not as much as it used to be. It's definitely scaled back, and budgets are smaller. People are being more careful about what they print. But print is here. You know, people our inboxes are all full of stuff that we never read, and, you know, some of that is dying down. And, you know, as far as keeping materials out of the landfill, paper's definitely an issue, and mailings are an issue. And, you know, we all have those companies where they send us all these big catalogs, and we kind of wonder why they're doing this, because we're never going to read it. We just recycle it. Hopefully we recycle at least. And so print, you know, the printing industry is always going to have that kind of issue they're dealing with. But if we can deal with everything else that we can control, and be as green as possible, and then if we can move to more sustainability as far as our paper chains and supplies and post-consumer waste, I think it can get better and better. You know, now more and more of our paper is actually coming from trees that are simply plantations. I mean, they're just big rows of trees that they rotate them in. They've genetically engineered the southern pine to a point where they can grow them to the point where they can cut them down in about 10 years. So more and more of the paper that we're using is coming from forests that are, you know, sustainable, and not, the carbon impact isn't as bad. So that's all positive.
And so my next question, Matt, is you talked a little bit about the reuse of the toner cartridges, or being able to send them back and the parts to the printers. Do you have anything else in your print shop that you reuse instead of recycling?
Yeah, we actually do have
set
some.
Up for a reuse program?
Yep, we do. We kind of have some, I don't know, kind of neighborhood community reuse program here that's not on the record, that's not written down, but at times we collect a lot of boxes. So a lot of our paper comes in with, you know, packages and other materials that we recycle, but some of it does come in boxes that we don't end up reusing. So we have a pretty routine, regular group of people that just kind of walk in off the street that, I don't know, I've known for almost 3 decades and don't know their name, but They come in, and if we have boxes, we give it to them. We also have people that come in just because they're moving or something and want to know if they can have some boxes, so we have that. But we also have some other materials. Our wide format printing, you know, a lot of it comes in rolls, and there's a tube that the material rolls around, and then there's also a big tube often that it's, you know, shipped in. And we have a couple different places specifically that ask us to keep those tubes. One is the Outreach Project here in Lincoln, which they're a nonprofit community organization that gets kids mainly involved in art projects, and then they use that to help the community in different ways with fundraisers and things like that. So we've donated a lot of those tubes to her, and then we also have some students from the university that come in, architectural students and things that come in and ask if we have these products and if they can use them. They're also great for the, you know, staff to take home and give to their kids to play with. They make great toys. So yeah, the materials that we get in here, as far as especially kind of the, you know, the packaging for shipping, it either gets reused or recycled, and so we feel pretty good about that too.
And then, Matt, what would you say is the biggest challenge with your recycling program?
Well, it takes space. You know, we're dealing with a lot of paper, and we are a small, you know, I'm about 5,000 square feet. Actually a little less than that, and we have a lot of equipment, a lot of people in here, and it's actually, I think, one of our strengths that we're kind of on top of each other, and we can kind of yell across the room at each other. But all that paper does take up a lot of space, and so we kind of have to work around it. And we've developed a system, but it is challenging at times, and it is something where this, you know, we have to kind of have buy-in here as far as this is what we're going to do, and it's okay, and it's going to take us some more time. The crew that picks it up is good, and we have a little system now where they show up and we kind of turn into little ants, and we kind of march all the crates out and get it in the truck, and off they go. You know, I don't really see this as a big hurdle yet. Maybe, I don't know if that's even the right word, but we used to get our recycling picked up at no cost. There is some cost now. It's not a cost that even makes me not want to do it, but there is that kind of lingering issue out there. Is that going to continue to go up? I don't think it is, but it is still a potential issue. And then the other thing is just making sure, like I said, I still see sometimes some things in some wrong containers, so we could probably be a little better. One of my goals for 2018 is to be a little better about making sure everyone that's here is on board and educated and feels comfortable knowing, you know, what materials go where, and making sure that we do as good a job as we possibly can to keep that happening. So those are probably the biggest ones.
Well, Matt, I don't have any more questions for you at this time. I appreciate your time and for presenting this to us today. And so
yeah, you're very welcome.
I'm going to end the webinar.
I appreciate it. Thank you.